Hey, what's up? Jason here. Welcome to the first extension for my new beginner video. If you haven't already seen that, you should probably go check it out, but it's a full tutorial on how to build out an Angry Bird style game where you drag a bird, make some stuff fly, and knock out some monsters. In this video, I'm going to show you how to add in another class, a class that creates what we call a line renderer, and it's going to give us some dots that'll show us what direction we're dragging our bird, what direction he's going to fly, and it's going to give us a little bit of experience with external class references and setting up some flags. It's going to be relatively simple and a lot of fun. So if you're interested, just stick with me. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and all that stuff. And if you haven't seen the other video, I'd recommend you go check it out. But you don't necessarily need that to see this one and to understand how line renderers work and how you could maybe use this in your own project to make some lines that show up wherever you need them. Let's get started. The first thing that we're going to need is a game object for our line renderer. You might think that we'd be adding it onto the bird, and that's a viable option. It's something that we could do. But if this is an object or a thing that we're going to be using all of the time, I don't want to have to add it to every single bird. We may end up creating, a dozen birds, and we don't want to have to set up and attach a line renderer and configure it for every single one of them. So we're going to create a separate object for that. Just go to game object, hit create empty, and let's just call this drag line. I'll hit F2 to go to rename mode and type in drag line with a capital L and a capital D there. Now, I want to add a line renderer component to it. So I'll go to the add component section and just search for line renderer. Type in LINE and it should pop up. There we go. I've got line renderer. I'll select that just by hitting enter. And now I have a line renderer, but I can't see anything on my screen. You're not going to see anything either. It's going to look like you did nothing. Then you might go, hey, well, let's reset the transform position. See if that maybe makes it show up. And still nothing shows up. Let's go to the scene view though. Maybe we'll see it there. Oh, look at that. I actually see it in my scene view. Only because I'm in 3D mode though. If I go to 2D mode and you're like this, dragging around with that right mouse button, you're not going to see that line renderer yet. If you go to 3D mode though, you might see it pop up. And if you're in 3D mode and don't see it, just double click on it and you'll definitely see it then. So we need to do something to make this line renderer show up to our player or to our camera. The issue right now, if I move over here holding the right mouse button and just using, what is this, WASD to move around, you can see that the line renderer is actually just behind the background. If I grabbed it and drag it out to the front, you'll see that it doesn't actually move. The reason it doesn't move is because a line renderer is set up with positions or points. Think of it as a set of different points where we're going to do a line from A to B to C to D or whatever, or 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, however many points we want to have. So our positions where the points are defined in this positions section. I need to modify the position of these. Let's say I grab the X value here and just adjust it. I'm going to grab right here so I can just click and drag instead of typing in a value. You can see that this is now stretching out to the right. Now to the right here, if I move over, is actually along the X axis. And if I go to 2D mode, oh, you still don't see it, but you can see here that it's starting to kind of clip through. Let's see what else I could adjust here though. If I adjust the Z value and change this from maybe a 1 to a 0, to see that now the ending point is no longer behind the background and it's equal with the starting point, which is kind of right on par with the background. Or if it was greater, it was going back behind the background if I drag it to the right. But if I drag it to the left here, you'll see that it actually just pops over to the in front of the background. So I could put in a value like negative 0.1 and just type that in. Let's go to the game view now and see if we see it. Look at that. Our line renderer shows up. There's a little bit of an issue though, because the first point of the line renderer doesn't have that Z value. It's still at the 0. So if I go back to my scene view, we'll just go over here. You can see that it's kind of going off to the edge. It's a little bit hard to see how much it's actually happening. But if I go back into 2D mode or even into my game view, and just change this to a negative 0.01. Oh, actually, I didn't even see a difference there. I expected to see a small difference. Oh, negative 0.1, sorry. I expected to see a small difference, but it looks like I'm close enough that it didn't even matter. So now I've got a line renderer where I can go adjust my X value here on the end point. I can adjust the X value on the beginning point. I can adjust the Y value to maybe move it up or down. And hopefully you're starting to see this might be used for drawing out those dots. What we're going to do is draw out those dots in a repeatable pattern along this line. And we'll just write a little bit of code that sets up where these positions are. So let's do that now. To use our dots, we need to go into the Art and UI folder. And I've got this outlined circle texture. If you didn't already download this, it was part of that bird art pack. Just go back and grab it. There'll be a link below. You can go grab it and see the entire first video. But go grab this. You'll have the little dot. It's really just a white dot that's 100 by 100 pixels. with a black outline. It's a little bit smaller than that. The entire image is 100 by 100. If you look at it right down here in the little preview, let's drag it up a little. If you look at it in the preview, you'll see that, but it's a little bit smaller in the actual size. So let's set up this texture to work on our line renderer. To do that, well, if we went to our drag line and just looked for a texture field, we'd probably be sad because we'd find that there isn't one. There's nowhere to actually create a texture. I need to create a material first so that I can assign the material to our materials section. If you don't see that, it's probably collapsed. Just expand it out and you'll see it there. So I'm going to, in my Art UI folder, right click, hit create, and choose material. I'll name this outlined circle to match my texture name and match the casing so that things stay nice and clean. And then I want to change my outlined circles shader type. I'm going to change this to something that's a cutout. So I'm just going to hit the box right here, click on the where it says standard, hit the drop down and search for the word cutout. And you'll see that we have a transparent cutout, an unlit transparent cutout. If I just put in the word cut, that'll find it. So I'll click on that and it'll allow me to select a simple texture. Now the other shader, we technically could figure out a way we could get it working, but there's a lot of lighting and stuff involved. We don't really need to go through the standard shader, so we're using the transparent cutout here. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to assign the texture. To do that, I can either click the select button and use the pop-up menu, go find it, or I can click and drag and just don't release until I get it right up here to get the plus and then release it. Now I've got a texture set up that's, well, in my material. So I've got an outlined material and an outlined texture. Let's go assign the material now to the line renderer. So I'll select the line renderer and then scroll down until I see the material. Ah, there it is. And then just drag my outline circle into it. Again, I could also just click the little box, get the search box, and then I could find it in here. Notice that the preview is going to look a little bit weird though because it tries to put our texture onto a sphere. So that's what it's showing us here. That's why it doesn't look like a nice clean circle there. But I could just go click on it there. And here we go. We've got a nice line with our dot on it. Looks great, right? Okay, obviously it's not perfect because it's stretching out our dot and not tiling it. So we need to change it over to a tile mode. Luckily, the line renderer's got this texture mode right here and it's set to stretch. We switch it to tile. Look at that, we've got this nice, beautiful tiled line renderer. Now I've got a lined dot that I can start, or a dotted line, not a line, dotted line that I can start using to show which way I'm dragging my bird so we can tell which way he's gonna go flying. Now I need to write a little bit of code. We need to set up something that's going to keep track of where the line position should start, maybe our position 0, where that should be, and where position 1 should be. Now, before we get into writing the code, let's think it through logically for just a moment. Our position 0 could just be our starting points. That could be where our bird is. And let's try modifying that in the scene view. I'm going to go to the scene view real quick, and I'm just going to hit the edit button. If you look right here, there's the edit points in scene view. And it'll allow me to click on one of these line renderers and select it and then move that point around. So I'm imagining the point is going to be somewhere around here for the first one. Then the second one, if I click on it over here, would be, it's going to come like back here as I drag, something like that, right? So obviously, I think the start point will probably be a little bit more down in here, but I'm going to get something around that. So I need some code that's going to figure out where the bird is when this thing starts, or where the bird starts out at. I could just maybe hard code it or something or place it there. But if I want to have this in multiple levels, if I want to have multiple birds or anything like that, hard coding it's going to make it a lot harder. So I'll write a single little one-liner or something to figure out where our bird is and set that position. And then we're going to need to keep track of where our mouse is when we're dragging and set our second position, our index 1, which is going to be essentially a set position. We'll give it an index 1 and give it the position we want it to go to. So let's go through that process now. We're going to begin by creating a script. Go to the scripts folder, right click, choose create, hit C# script, and we'll call this a drag line to match our object name. We've got a drag line script. I'll select my drag line object and assign the drag line script to it. Actually, I'm going to collapse the line renderer first so I can see more stuff over here and then assign the drag line script to it. Then I'll just double click on it and open it up in Visual Studio. Again, if your Visual Studio doesn't look right, you don't see the outlines, you don't see the coloring, something looks a little bit strange, go back into Unity, go to, well, first save everything, and go to File or Edit, and then you want to go to Preferences and External Tools, and try regenerating project files. Make sure that your external script editor is set to the one that you're actually using. I'm using Visual Studio Community. You can use whichever one works for your system. Community is the default for Windows, and I believe code is the default for a Mac. So use that, hit the regenerate button, and it should fix the code issue if you're having it. You may have to reopen Visual Studio though. Close it, regenerate it, and then open Visual Studio. All right, now's the fun part. We get to write some code. Now let's think real quickly about what we want to do here. We want to do something with that line renderer to set its positions. We want to modify its position 0 and its position 1, and we need to figure out where the bird is and whether or not the bird's been drugged or being dragged around. So we're going to need to figure out how to write the code for those two things. The first one is pretty easy. We want to figure out what our line renderer is or where our line renderer is, and maybe save that off into a variable so that we can start setting positions. The first one is going to be our bird's initial position. So let's go through the code of getting our line renderer, caching that, and then setting it to our bird's initial position, or setting position 0 to match our bird's initial position. First, we're going to need to get a reference to our line renderer. I'm going to cache that in a private local variable for our class called lineRenderer, and I'll do that with an underscore first. I say lineRenderer, and I'm going to use my typical camel case and the underscore just to denote that it's going to be a private field inside my class. So I'll say that lineRenderer is equal to getComponent lineRenderer. Add my open close parentheses and semicolon, and then I need to go back over to it and actually generate the field or the definition for it. Hit Alt Enter and enter, and then we get a private lineRenderer. I can delete the private keyword just because it's redundant and doesn't need to be there. Doesn't matter if it's there, doesn't hurt at all, but I'm going to get rid of it because I don't need it. So I've got a line renderer now that's saved off. What do I need to do next? Well, I need to find the bird and then save that bird off. So let's do that. Say underscore bird equals, and here I'm not going to use a get component call because I'm going to have this here on my drag line object and my bird is over here. So if my drag lines script tries to call get component and get a bird component, it's not going to find it. The bird is over here. To find an object in my scene that's on a different game object, or a component really that's on a different game object, I need to use a different call. I'll use the find object of type and give it the type indicator there, and then we'll give it bird for our type. And then we'll use open close parentheses and a semicolon again. This is going to find the only bird in the scene. If there are multiple birds, it's just going to find the first bird in the scene. Only really works well if we have a single bird. So for now, that's our case though, so it's going to be totally fine. I'll hit Alt Enter and generate a field. I have to have my cursor on the bird to do that though. If it's somewhere else, that Alt Enter and Enter isn't going to give you that. It's going to do something completely different. Double click on that private field or private keyword and just delete it because again, I don't need it. So what do we want to do in our update? Well, let's first start by just setting our line renderer's position to our bird's position. So say LineRenderer.SetPosition, and here we have to choose. We either give it index 0 or index 1. Of course, if we had a line renderer with 100 points, we could go all the way up to index 99. Or if we had one with 50 points, we could go up to index 49. But right now we have a line renderer with 2 positions or 2 points. That's what we've set up here. Let's go look at it real quick. Got our line renderer on our drag line, and it's got positions 0 and 1. We have 2 points. I need to pick which one am I going to move in update. Am I going to move position 0 or position 1? Now, I think from my previous experimenting, I'm thinking that position 1 is the one that moves around during the update or moves with my mouse every frame. So let's do that. Let's set the position of the line renderer's position 1 to our bird's position every frame. So say 1 for our index, and then our position is just going to be bird.transform.position. That will get the transform component and the position of it. That's going to move our line renderer. Let's check that out and see how that works. Go back into Unity. I'm going to hit play. Click and drag my bird, and well, look at that. It actually kind of works. My bird's moving around, my line renderer is working. You can see that the Z position is 0, but because that other Z position is negative 0.1, it's working totally fine, and it seems okay. So looking good so far, except look at that. I release it, and suddenly I've got a line coming off of my bird. Not quite the behavior that we want, right? So we need some detection now to see whether or not our bird is being drug around. Because I really only want this line to show up when we start dragging our bird, and we want it to go away when we stop dragging our bird. So let's set up a way that we can make an external reference to the bird and read whether or not it's being drug around. So let's look at our bird script again and see if we can figure out where we could put that code or how that might work. So in our bird, we have a couple fields that we can modify. We've got some private fields at the top. We cache some stuff in awake, and we looks like we set our start position in start, which is probably a useful thing. Thinking about our initial position for the bird, that might be a useful one to have around. And then we have, look here, on mouse down, we set the color to red when we start dragging it. And then on mouse up, we set it to white when we launch it. So I'm thinking right in here in on mouse down and on mouse up, we could perhaps just set a flag, set a Boolean variable, a true or false variable on our bird for whether or not it's being drug around or is dragging or something like that. So let's go through that process now. Let's make a new property here. I'm going to go in my on mouse down. I'm going to zoom in a bit, scroll down a little bit, and I'm going to say is dragging equals true. So that when we start dragging it, we'll set this property that doesn't exist yet to true. Now it's giving me an error because it doesn't exist. So I'll go over to it, hit Alt Enter, and generate a property for it. That's going to probably put it right up here at the top. So I can just scroll up here. And it's going to give me a public Boolean property named isDragging. It has a get method so that it can be read publicly by anything. So any other class will be able to read this isDragging. That's why it says public here. And the get method doesn't have a special accessor in front of it. But after that, it also has a private set. This means that it can only be set internally. It can only be set by this bird class, but it can be read publicly by any class, which is exactly what we want. We want our drag line to read it, and we want our bird to write it. This prevents us from accidentally misusing things. Our drag line, for instance, should never be setting our isDragging variable. So this private keyword right here automatically and just by default gives us a little bit of protection against misuse and prevents us from, I guess, making that mistake or somebody else on our team from making that mistake. We'll go down and when do we want to set it to false? Well, when we release. So we'll just go right down here in our on mouse up and right at the end we'll say isDragging equals false. Now we could look at the sprite renderer color maybe and do some comparison there, but that seems really dirty and messy. So adding this variable here that we can look at is a much better option. I'm going to save this. Control S. We'll go back into our drag line. And then here in our line renderer, let's do a check to see if our birds being drug around or something. So say if underscore bird dot is dragging. Then in that case, well, we want to actually set our position, right? So we'll set our position to that line renderer position. So I'll add a brace here, go to the end of this one and add another brace. So we only want to set our position if we're dragging the bird around. Let's save that off, go back into Unity and see if that kind of solves our problem or not. So here we go. We go in, we hit play, we click, we drag, and we release. And well, the line's not following me anymore. But you might have noticed the line was still kind of hanging out there. So let's go fix that now. How could we adjust that? Well, we can add an else statement. So if the bird isn't being dragged around or isn't dragging, we can add an else and say, else do this other code. So we add some braces here. What'll happen is if it's dragging, it'll run this code right after it. And if it's not, so if this is not the case, it's not true, it'll run the code in these braces after it. So what do I want to do in these braces after it? I think I just want to turn the line renderer off. So say LineRenderer.enabled equals false. Now if I try this out, we're going to have an issue. Let's go do it. Let's go see what that issue is. I jump over here, I hit play, and I click and drag, and now I don't see anything. Nothing's working, everything's broken. Let's go select our drag line. Look at that, the line renderer is off. I'm going to let my bird kind of die and reset. Let's watch the line renderer. It never turns back on. So we're turning it off, but we never turn the thing back on. So we need to go back into the code. And in our if statement, where we're turning it off, or before we're turning off, where we're setting the position, we want to also enable our line renderer. So I'll take this line of code, copy it. So I select the whole thing, hit Control C, go up here on 21, hit enter, and Control V to paste it, and then replace false with true. So that we'll enable our line renderer and set the position. Otherwise, we'll turn our line renderer off. Let's save this, go back to Unity one more time, and see the magic in action. We should now have a line renderer. Look at that. It shows up. It drags around with us. And if I release, it disappears. And when my bird reappears here, bam, it's back again. Now my line renderer is cool and all, and I've got this drag line, but if I go on to level 2, it's not going to work anymore. It's just going to disappear. Let's try it out. So I kill my 2 monsters. Maybe I'll kill them both. I'll try to kill them. There we go. Got them both. I go on to level 2, and look at that. No drag line. Let's expand out our level. The reason is that I don't have that drag line object in here. So I'd have to go in and add this to level 2. Let's stop though and see if there's an easier way to do that. If I open up my level 1, I can see that I've got a camera setup prefab and a couple other prefabs. I'm going to go into level 2. I'll save my level 1, and here I can see that I also have a camera setup and a level controller and a couple other shared prefabs. For me, this seems like the kind of thing that I could just slap into my camera setup and reshare across all of my levels. This is really an in-game camera setup. It's kind of a camera setup for this bird to follow him around. So it makes sense as a way to make this change. What I'm going to do is expand out my camera setup and drag my drag line into here. Now it's important if I drag it up to the middle or the top, I'm going to get this message that says, hey, you have to open the prefab to do this. The reason is because we can't insert things into the middle of a prefab in this hierarchy mode. What we can do, however, is click and drag and append them to the bottom. So if I get it right here under main camera, it'll work fine. Give me the little plus there saying that I've now added something to this prefab, and if I want to make a change to it, I can apply that and have it go to all the instances of that prefab. I've got my drag line here. How am I going to make that change? Well, I'll click on my camera setup and click on overrides here, and I'm going to drag this over so you can see it a little bit better. Click on overrides, and I'll get this pop-up here. This pop-up allows me to make adjustments to the prefab that match my camera setup. So if I do this, what it's going to do is add this drag line, essentially. Notice the little plus here. Right here, it's showing me all of the components. The only one that's different is this drag line. It's got a plus here. It's saying that it's going to add the drag line to the prefab, and it'll be part of the prefab, and we should expect it to turn blue. Let's hit apply all. Look at that, it turned blue. And now if I save my scene, because I've modified my prefab, I need to save my scene because I modified the prefab in there. Now I need to go back to level 2, expand out my camera setup, and look at that, I've got my drag line. Let's open up actually I'll just go into level 2, hit play and see how it works. So I click and I drag, and look at that. Not quite right. So what's going on here? It's flying in the right direction, but the line is in the wrong spot. If we look here, it's because our positions for this are wrong. So our positions in level 2 don't match position in level 1. This is when I said we probably don't want to hard code things. We don't want to hard code positions because then it kind of locks us into having the same starting position. It makes it a little bit harder to work. So we can add a single line of code here to make this a little bit easier so that we don't have to do that and so that our start position just goes to wherever our bird is right at the beginning. To do that, we'll open up our drag line script one more time. And then in our start method, we can just set our line renderer's 0 position to our bird's position. Let's see if that'll work though. To do it, we'll say LineRenderer.SetPosition. We'll give it the position 0. And just like before, let's scroll down. We can see what we did. We will use bird.transform.position. Hit bird.transform.position. Go to the end and add a semicolon. Save that off and see if our game is better now or if we've broken it all again. We hit play. And we drag and nothing. But notice that I've got my inspector up right now. Look at the positions there. The X and Y values seem good, but look at that Z. The Z's are going to 0. The reason for that is that our bird is also going to 0. We have 2 options or ways that we can make a fix to this. We can go into our drag line and we could either set the Z position right here to something else. So we could say maybe, let's do it this way. We'll say vector 3 line 0 position equals, and then we'll say new vector 3. We'll give it the bird.transform.position.x, and then we need to give it a y position. So we'll give it the bird.transform.position.y, and then we need to give it a z value. And here we give it the negative 0.1f. Now, I don't like the way that this is formatted at all because it doesn't really fit on the screen. So we're going to change it up. What we're going to do is expand out these parameters so that they're each on their own line. I'm going to go right here before the bird, after the vector 2 and the parenthesis. Hit enter. I'll go to the next comma right after it and hit enter. And go to the next one and hit enter. Hit home, hit enter right there, and align this up. So now I've got a new vector 3 that has these 3 parameters. And if you were ever wondering, can I do this? Can I split out my parameters or my code across multiple lines? You definitely can, and sometimes it just makes sense. When it's getting too wide like this and you can't read the whole thing, then hey, split it out into multiple lines. Make it easier to read, make it easier on yourself. A lot of the time, having 1 parameter per line makes a lot of sense, especially when you get beyond 3 parameters. You get to 4, 5, 6 parameters, and they're not tiny little things that are really obvious. Separating it out can help a lot. So we've got this vector 3. What are we going to do with it? Well, we'll double click on it, copy it, and make that our new position. So all we've done here is instead of using the bird's position, we're using the bird's position with a negative 0.1 on the z value. We'll go back into Unity. We'll hit play. And drag the bird around, and now you can see that it works. I wanted to show one other way that you can do this, though. Let's go back into the drag line, and I'm going to just replace this line 0 position with the bird transform position. Copy that and paste it right in, and I'm going to select this whole chunk, and I'm going to comment this out with Control-K, Control-C. Now, I wanted to show you this because it's something that's kind of important to understand and know that it exists, but it doesn't matter which way you do it. You can do it this way, you can do it the other way. It's just really going to depend on the devices that you're using and the whole setup that you have. Really, in all reality, though, in this case, it's not going to matter. But I wanted to show you because I think it's kind of neat. So here we've got that same position where we're setting up our position at 0. We're not going at that negative 0.1. We're not bringing it forward. So what's the other way that we could maybe make this show up? Well, let's hit play first. Make sure that it doesn't show up. Okay, not showing up. And then let's go to the material. I'm going to just leave it playing. Go to our outlined circle material and look at the render queue option. If I want, I can actually adjust this. What this does is adjust when things are rendered. This can control things like rendering after the Z axis. So after we've figured out what things are going to be rendered in front of each other based on their position, we can actually use the render queue option to adjust things to render on top of those things or even behind those things. And we can adjust them individually, well, per material, and it's really cool, really powerful. But what I want to show you is that we can just click on the drop down here and change it to transparent. Notice that the value goes to 3000, which is higher than what it was before. And now if I click and drag, bam, it works fine too. So we can just move our render queue on that material, force it to the front, not have to worry about the position. Another really cool little trick and another way to do it with a little bit less code. Now I'm going to save off my project and wrap it up from here. But if you like this and you have thoughts on it, make sure that you leave those down below. Also, make sure that you leave a thumbs up and subscribe and all that stuff. And if you have more suggestions for ideas or extensions to this project and this tutorial, make sure that you click through to the page. Let me know. There's a form there so you can submit them. And the really popular ones I'm just going to kind of take with and run with and start extending things out and try to just add in a little bit more extra educational info while I do it. So if you like these things, you had fun with it, make sure that you just let me know, share it, subscribe, all that stuff. And again, thanks for watching.